So good morning. I'm Jeff Keener, President and CEO of the South Metro Denver Chamber. I'd like to welcome all of you here today, all of our members and our guests to the 2022 Economic Forecast Breakfast. Again, thank you for being here. While you continue to enjoy your breakfast, I'd like to thank our sponsors and our partners for today. Our presenting sponsor today is Whipplewood CPAs. Our gold sponsor, Arapahoe County. Silver sponsor, the City of Castle Pines. Silver sponsor, Colorado State University. Go Rams. Silver sponsor, the Lone Tree Art Center. I'd like to thank our table sponsors today. And maybe what we'll do, if we could hold applause, I'll read through. First Bank, Academy Bank, Alpine Bank, City of Lone Tree, Comcast, Denver Water, Hayes, a division of Brown & Brown, Health One, Skyridge Medical Center, South Suburban, the Villager Newspaper, Unite Private Networks, and Excel Energy. Our friends of the Chamber today, Corkin & Company and Light Sail Video. And Light Sail Video is going to be filming the event that we will later post for all of those that would like to see it. So if you would you give a big round of applause to our sponsors? I now have the privilege to introduce a tremendous leader, a true champion of the Chamber, and a champion of the business community. Would you please extend your applause and a warm welcome for Rick Bruno from First Bank. Rick is our chair of the board for the South Metro Denver Chamber.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. On behalf of the Board of Directors of the South Metro Denver Chamber, I'd like to welcome you to our annual Economic Forecast Breakfast. My name is Rick Bruno. I'm the current board chair of the Chamber. I'm honored to hold this position and to carry on the legacy of so many who have served before me. The Board of Directors of this great chamber is made up of women and men who represent businesses large and small, some of the finest educational institutions in the state, and local counties and municipalities. We work together to create opportunities for businesses, to connect through events and communities, to advocate for our members on important legislative issues, and to educate members and non-members on matters important to the economic health of the community. At this time, I would like to ask all of our current board members of the South Metro Denver Chamber to please stand and be recognized. You know, it's so great to see everyone here today in person. It was 2 years ago, January 24th, 2020, was the last time we gathered for this event. So we've taken a couple years here since we've been able to get back together. So I did a little research. I just wanted to see what was going on 2 years ago. It seems like it was forever ago, but yet it was not that long ago. The top movie at the time was a movie called Bad Boys for Life. The Nuggets and the Avalanche were in playoff contention, just like they are today. The Broncos, well, they had missed the playoffs for the fourth consecutive year. Unfortunately, that streak continues. And the Rockies, well, they're the Rockies, right? The Dow Jones on January 24th, 2020 closed at 28,990, closed at 34,161 yesterday. And for the first time, we started to hear a term called coronavirus that was floating around, and we kind of knew what it was, but we didn't really know what it was. Well, little did we know what the future had in store for us. So as we transition to what we hope will be the new normal phase of COVID, we enter with a sense of optimism and hope for 2022, and I hope our presenters today will back me up on that as we move forward. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you today our presenting sponsor, Rick Whipple and his firm Whipplewood CPAs. Let me read a little bit of information on Rick. Rick Whipple leads Whipplewood CPAs as CEO and strives to make an impact on the local and national level. Rick's passion for small businesses has taken him all the way to the White House. In 2012, he met with Presidential Senior Advisor Valerie Jarrett in the White House to discuss how federal policies affect small businesses. On behalf of small businesses nationwide, Rick has engaged with and lobbied numerous senators on 4 separate trips to Washington. These efforts, coupled with Rick's tireless work on the local level to promote Denver area small businesses, led him to being named a finalist for the National Small Business Association's Small Business Advocate of the Year Award in 2018. Rick was also named a hero by the Colorado Society of CPAs at its 2018 CPA Make a Difference celebration. Rick's career in public accounting began in 1978. He was a co-founder of Whipplewood CPAs in 1981 and became its CEO in 2004. His experience as an entrepreneur and small business owner over the span of 40 years is vital to his success as a CPA and small business advisor. Rick is very involved in the community. He has served as board of directors of this organization, the South Metro Denver Chamber of Commerce. He chaired the South Metro Denver Chamber Economic Development Group. He's a board member of the Denver Better Business Bureau and was chair of the board of Colorado Lending Source. Rick spends his spare time with his wife and 2 teenage children. By being a good mentor to his kids and to his employees at Whipplewood, he hopes to make the world a little better every day. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend and our presenting sponsor today, Rick Whipple with Whipplewood CPAs.
Thank you, Rick. And congratulations for being the Chamber's new chair. This is a position I held and consider it one of the most rewarding years of my life. The Denver area is a very small community. Rick and I both served on the board of the Colorado Lending Source, now branded as B-Side Funding, where I am the outgoing chair. Rick was one of the people who interviewed me for my original board position there. We're very small in Denver as a community, and we're very interconnected. So, what do we do at Whipplewood CPAs? We are educators first. We have a smart team and have a strong desire and willingness to coach and educate our clients. We have a deep technical knowledge that allows us to be consistently constructive and instructive. It is important to us that we get our clients to a place of confidence and competence about the complexities of their situation. We create opportunity. Because we are multi-generational and diverse with a tenured leadership, we can provide creative and expert perspectives from a deep bench. We will present creative solutions for you. We start our plan with the future in mind, and we take a team approach with every client so that you can have the best expertise for any given situation. We can move mountains when it counts. We do this one step at a time. Tax situations and fiscal management are getting more complicated. We take the extra steps to simplify and stabilize unique situations. We also believe that it is critically important to support our total business community through our memberships in various organizations, especially this chamber. We have found that to have a strong business, you must have a strong community. And that community is built by everyone's support, especially you here. Thank you for being here, for supporting the chamber, and for supporting the sponsors of this event. We all need you, and we all need each other. So thank you again. Now for Jeff.
Rick, thank you, and thank you to Whipplewood CPAs. You guys have been great. They're a great partner to the chamber. Okay. Kevin Pitts was going to be our moderator today, and he a little bit under the weather. So I'd like to introduce Dennis Huss-Penny as our moderator today. Dennis is a business reporter with the Denver Gazette. He has more than 30 years of experience in journalism, public relations, and media relations. including as the former real estate reporter with the Denver Business Journal. Dennis is a Denver native and a University of Colorado Boulder graduate. He and his wife Claire own Nerds to Go, a computer company in Parker. So Dennis, if you would please welcome Dennis, and I'm going to turn, there you are behind me, I'm going to turn the show over to you.
Good morning, everybody. As you can tell, I'm not Kevin Pitts, the illustrious publisher of the Denver Business Journal. Awful big shoes to fill, but I'm hoping I can keep things moving this morning. And we all wish Kevin get better soon, quickly. Our panelists have some interesting and informative presentations to share about what's in store for the Colorado economy in 2022. We are excited that you are all here with us. I'd like to thank Jeff Keener and the South Metro Chamber of Commerce for including the Denver Gazette in the program this morning. I hope you all are Denver Gazette readers. Who's heard of the Gazette? Denver Gazette? Anyone? Anyone? Thank you. We're Denver's newest news organization, having just launched a year and a half ago, during a pandemic, I might add. Since then, we're proud to say that we're Denver's fastest growing news source. Readers saw the value of that coverage in one of the newsiest months in Colorado that I can remember seeing in the last 30 years. The Denver Lakewood shooting rampage, the deadly Marshall fire that destroyed 1,100 homes and businesses, and most recently, the labor dispute between King Soopers and the union workers. The Denver Gazette is owned by Clarity Media. It's your hometown newspaper with a newsroom downtown and brings Colorado's biggest journalism staff to your fingertips every day, with more than 100 journalists contributing from all of our publications, which includes Colorado Politics and the Colorado Springs Gazette. Our e-edition brings more daily local journalism than any other media outlet, more than 60 pages. It's like getting a Sunday paper every day. What's more, we're the future of newspapers. The pages of our fully interactive digital edition come alive with video, podcasts, photo galleries, and other multimedia. We'd like to think that we're the last bastion of fair, balanced, and objective reporting. It's about the only place in Denver where the left and right can still meet, and you can find all sides of the story. By the way, you can read the story about today's economic forecast at denvergazette.com before the day is out, or in tomorrow's Saturday's e-edition. So you all subscribe, drop my name, and get a free subscription. Now on to our program. Our first panelist this morning is going to be by Henry Sobanet. Henry is a Colorado native, educated at Regis Jesuit High School, and holds a bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Colorado, go Buffs. He began his professional career as an economist at the Colorado Legislative Council, the nonpartisan research office for the state legislature. Henry's first employment at the governor's office of state planning and budgeting was in 1999 as deputy director. In September of 2004, Governor Bill Owens appointed him to be the director of the office, where he served through the end of the term. In 2011, Governor John Hickenlooper asked Henry to return to Denver's as the director of the Office of State Planning and Budgeting. And during his tenure, the office created a performance management academy for state government leadership, fostered the adoption of lean process improvement efforts in all state departments, and rewrote the state's strategic planning and performance management law. These efforts have received both in-state and national accolades in several books, articles, and an academic review from the University of Colorado. Currently, Henry is serving as the Senior Vice Chancellor of Administration and Government Relations and Chief Financial Officer for Colorado State University System, go Rams. In this role, he covers the system-wide financial issues and long-term planning, annual budgeting, treasury functions, and government affairs. Welcome, Henry.
Thank you, Dennis. Good morning, everybody. Such a pleasure to be back here. And it's an honor to share the stage with Elizabeth and Tuhin and Dennis. We have some people from the CSU system here today, and in regards to the bets you had on my early attendance, I did have time for a shower. I did not get lost, and that third bet we can't talk about at a meeting like this. So I'm going to talk about the economy today, and we'll talk about a little bit what happened in the past. So sorry we get to relive the pandemic together through charts and graphs. I know you're excited to do that, and you're not even in your Zoom pants. And so, but we'll get through it. So there's four things kind of to set the stage a little bit for the look ahead. And I think the one thing to talk about first is the absolutely massive fiscal and monetary stimulus that was thrown at the pandemic and is supporting kind of our ongoing operations right now. Between what the Federal Reserve did and what the Congress and presidents have done, 13.7 trillion of available stimulus or supports for the U.S. economy. 9.6 of it is committed and mostly out the door, not all of it just yet. That 9.6 trillion, you can still wrap your head around that number, is 45% of 2019 U.S. gross domestic product. So these numbers are hard to wrap your head around because we're not used to talking about them. 12 zeros after a number, that's a lot. But we'll see why it had to be so big here in a second. So second, and to Mr. Bruno's point, most economic activity is getting back or will be back in 2022 to where it was before the pandemic. A few states have already gotten back there based on their employment. I've listed those there. A lot of different factors going on, but it seems like those states seem to have benefited from a lot of in-migration from higher cost states during the recession, during the pandemic. So, and here in Colorado, anytime we talk about the economy, we have to acknowledge the multi-decade push that we've had around diversifying our economy, as well as the regionalism that we've approached in our economic development. We don't have as many warring local governments for economic development. There's been so much collaboration, as evidenced by the leadership in this room, but other business groups around the state. This has been happening since the 1980s, and it's paid off. It's a different composition in our Colorado economy than 30 years ago. Lastly, public sector budgets, state and local government, are well cushioned right now. The projected drop at the start of the pandemic wasn't as bad as originally envisioned, and then the massive interventions helped shore things up, and then there's still money in the bank yet to be deployed going forward. So spent a lot of time there. I'm sorry for words on the first PowerPoint slide. Did he really do that to us this morning? But this is the best way to kind of set the stage for looking ahead. So here's Colorado real gross domestic product, and it looks like the slide's cut off there. That's what those words say under there. And so we have a little trend line created that we were on prior to the pandemic, but you can see the magnitude of the drop. But we're back to where we were, but that lost employment, lost production, this being off of our old trend line, still not back to that trend line yet, but we are, based on this measure, back and growing again. So employment is usually what most people try to wrap their heads around. And so what we have here is three different forecasts from our friends at the Legislative Council. And this is not a forecast critique slide. This is rather, how do you can't have a model that's going to predict a pandemic. So when there's normal forecasting scenarios, what does it look like? And so in the blue here, this was the projection of December 2019, looking ahead, steady as she goes, our diversified economy. Things were going pretty well, just the normal kind of how does forecasting look? Orange was at the end of 2020, so okay, yep, that happened. There's the drop. And what happens from here? And a bounce back predicted. And we're kind of in the same mode. The numbers are off just a little bit. But the trend line you can see accelerating. And during 2022, we expect to be back and above pre-pandemic employment based on non-farm jobs. So it wasn't the same pandemic for everybody, and it's not the same recovery for everybody. And policy, business planning, all kind of have to take this into account. Many places didn't have the disruption that others did, and we're still seeing lower recoveries in industries that have, on the average, lower wage jobs than others, and that ties up to where the biggest impacts from the pandemic were.
leisure and hospitality, entertainment, things like that. And then by the flip side, there was massive demand for some higher wage jobs during the pandemic, and their ability to insulate themselves and navigate and continue operations, continue serving customers, continue making money, didn't have the same disruption, and they're actually, on the average, back above pre-pandemic levels. So, looking ahead, we have some newer concerns from a year ago, so we'll talk a little bit about inflation, workforce availability and morale, supply disruptions. We could probably spend the whole morning on this supply topic, and don't worry, we won't. And then housing affordability, which is probably not a new topic, but we certainly need to kind of address it as we look ahead. How do we plan? And some of these topics hopefully overlap well with the presentation you'll hear from Elizabeth. So, inflation. We are seeing price increases that we haven't seen in a very long time. And we have this word now, transitory, and I think it's the Latin root for the concept of denial, and that's what economists. So we think it's transitory. So in Colorado, the reason it's viewed as transitory is you go by component, major component by component, and for some reason we had a large surge in prices for apparel, and so that's growing at a very high rate, and so that's pushing it up. And then transportation services, that has a little more intuitive sense of why Colorado inflation looks disjointed. The other metrics of inflation are pretty muted, including housing. And I know that's where you kind of get, how does that work? And it's the reason is the housing component of CPI is conducted in an awkward way for getting a sense of what's happening on the ground. They do a survey, and they survey a sampling of homeowners, and they say, what do you think you could rent your house for? And then the homeowner, even if they're not renting out their house, says what they think they could rent their house for. And then they ask another question, if you are renting your house, what do you charge? So that gets maybe a little bit more in the ballpark. But when you see housing prices and when you see real estate activity, it doesn't match up with 2-3% inflation. I think it's a result of that survey. So official inflation is a process, it's a number. Your mileage may vary as a business or as a household. It depends what you buy, it depends where you buy, it depends what's going on in those particular industries. So on the average, last year was kind of being ballparked at 3.7%, and then looking ahead to 2022, about 3.4%. We will see how that plays out. The last value, the November value for CPI for Colorado compared to the November value a year ago was growing at 6.5 rate, for example, and September it was 4.5. So it bounces around. So transitory until otherwise updated. Okay, so workforce. This chart is the quit rate. And so this gets a ton of attention, and I think our journalist friends, it must generate a lot of clicks because there's tons of stories about quits. And here's another economic maxim. Everybody knows somebody who's quit. Everybody probably has worked with somebody who's quit. The plural of anecdote is not data. So the reason the person you know quit isn't why everybody in the economy has quit. So as we kind of get more information, we start to see some trends coming out. So a recent study from MIT put pay as the reason for quitting is not anywhere near the top 5. Who wants to guess the top reason? I didn't hear any of that. The answer is culture. So culture being the first reason. So opportunities for advancement, opportunities for training, maybe at some place like CSU Global. Paid promotion included. Opportunities for advancement, interacting with the public, especially during a pandemic, and then you'll hear more from Elizabeth on the subject about the aging population. We've had the baby boomers turning 65 now at a rate of about 10,000 a day for many years. And with housing prices up, stock market up, it might just be time to do something else. So it's an amalgam of all these things, but the reason you're seeing so many stories about it is you can see the statistic has changed. And let's also keep in mind, this statistic is correlated with confidence in households, the confidence to step aside, the confidence to make a change. This is absolutely brutal for an employer when a good employee leaves. The transition cost, the cost to hire, the time it takes, the lost productivity. But that's the market economy, that's capitalism, that's the churn. And you can see that when we've had downturns, the quit rate really drops. So you could also use this as a proxy for household confidence. And there's a flip side to this story when you're not thinking it only through an employer lens. So housing, boy, it's been really gangbusters depending where you live. It's been frustrating depending if you're looking for a house. And so here's just a sampling of statistics from RE Colorado on their annual report. I hope they're big enough to read. I'm sorry if they weren't. But average close price for a single family residence last year, $688,000, up $200,000 from 2017. Now, just like everything else, there's two sides to that transaction. The person who sold has an extra $200,000. The person who buys, that $200,000, if they had to borrow it, 3.5%, that's $900 a month. So maybe not the end of the world for some families, that's wonderful. But for other businesses, that's $900 a month that's not available for other activity or other spending. So this availability of housing, the cost of housing is definitely a headwind on our growth. So at CSU System, we are so excited to restart our relationship with the Colorado Future Center, a non-for-profit entity focusing on nonpartisan and in-depth research on economic vibrancy. And so we're back up and running with them, and they have a new research product called the Colorado Cast. And so what we're trying to do here is every quarter we're going to give a short-term forecast of where we think the Colorado economy is going. It's a little bit like when you go in and get your blood pressure taken. It's what's happening right now. And they have found, the researchers at the Colorado Future Center, they have found a way to forecast what your blood pressure will be, so to figure out what's happening right now in the future right now. So these are the variables that go in there, and the plus and minus signs are the correlation. So for example, Wilshire 500 stock index, if that goes up, the coincident index says growth. If initial unemployment rate claims go down, that's good news too, and that's why there's a negative correlation there. So those are the 6 statistics. They have a magic computer box that forecasts this. It's beyond my skill set, if I ever even had it close to that in my old career. And they have found a way to forecast this going forward. So just for fun, this is the annualized growth rate of the Colorado Cast going all the way back. And to get the percentage changes right, you had to go from negative 100 to 80% to accommodate the pandemic on one graph. So this tells you absolutely nothing about the time along the way. But they go in depth here where the little circles are. And so we zoom in there. And so our coincident index, the forecast here from the Colorado Future Center, is that for the next 6 months, it is most reasonable to expect pretty robust growth rates for the Colorado economy. And for all the reasons we've talked about, the backstop of the stimulus, the bounce back, the consumer confidence. And so as we look ahead, it's still the big trends that are going to dominate. You're going to hear from Elizabeth about the boomers, the millennials, Gen Z, and then there's other names of the cohorts. Managing COVID, the best prediction I have for you today is that we will be still talking about it in some capacity, and it's not going to end when they run out of Greek letters. It's like hurricanes. They'll find another way to name the variants. We still have income inequality and adaptations to climate change. Conversations around business climate will continue. Recent CNBC ranking had Colorado still ranked 8th overall, but still the lagging issues were business cost and business climate, but really strong, leading the country in innovation and tech and in workforce. So, and then lastly, all of this assumes that the strength of community, the collaboration, the conversations that happen in rooms like this, institutions like the South Metro Chamber still continue. America can continue this experiment. So all of those are foundational assumptions, but the reason I love doing talks like this is where the work gets done, this is where the dialogue happens. So let's keep it going this morning and ongoing in the months ahead. Look forward to your questions in the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Henry. Who said economists are dry and boring? Our next panelist this morning is Elizabeth Garner. She is the Colorado State Demographer and has directed the State Demography Office in the Department of Local Affairs since 2004. Elizabeth travels the state talking with Coloradans about social and economic conditions that are brought about by population shifts. The State Demography Office applies an understanding of demographic trends to changes in a range of areas, including the state's economy, workforce, education, housing, migration, and rural populations. Elizabeth has more than 25 years of experience analyzing population and economic trends in Colorado. Her current research agenda involves examining Census 2020 results, demographic impacts from COVID-19, housing supply and demand, and aging. Elizabeth is an economist and received her BA in business at the University of San Diego and her master's in agriculture and resource economics at Colorado State University. Elizabeth was born and raised in Colorado, something only 43% of the state's population can claim. How many? Colorado natives? That's about 43%. Thank you. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for having me with you today. You know, you made that comment about economists, but what about economists that do demographics? Talk about exciting Friday morning content. So apologies, but I did not set the agenda at all. So a couple of things that I really want to make sure get through in this conversation is one, that we're going to continue to grow, but at a slowing rate. So that velocity of the population growth is starting to slow down. A lot of that has to do with just slowing in births, increased deaths, and slowing migration. I want to talk a little bit more about migration in terms of the fact that it's harder and harder to attract and retain the best and the brightest. We're also seeing concentrated growth along the I-25 corridor, and that makes the growth feel different. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And aging. Who woke up a day older? Right? So we're doing this, we're doing it all the time, and it affects everything that we do. And it's important for all of us in our own communities to understand that age dynamic. Housing, I'll talk a little bit about that and the constrained growth in the housing market and the fact that we're becoming more racially and ethnically diverse. So who was so excited to get the 2020 numbers? Oh my God, I stayed in this job just to do this. I know I need to reevaluate my goal system, right? So we saw that the US increased by 22 million, a 7.4 growth rate over the decade. Second slowest growth rate in the United States for a decade in history. Second to the Great Depression in the 1930s. So that should have meant to you, oh, wow, the US is slowing down. Hopefully that's what you took away. If the US is slowing down, that's going to have impacts in Colorado. Colorado grew by 744,000, an increase of 14%, twice as fast as the US as a whole. It was our fourth slowest decade. So take that into account. We, were in terms of sixth ranked, in terms of percentage change, ninth in numeric change, and just enough for that 8th congressional seat and all of the drama that came with it. Was that fun? I am so glad that's not in my office. The thing I want you to take away, though, is our growth between 2020 and 2021. We increased by 27,000 people. If you had paid attention, you would have seen 744 over the decade. Divide that by 10, that means an average of 74,000 a year. 27,000 between 2020 and 2021. I didn't hear any gasps. So we did slow down. That should slow down. Only 14,000 in net migration. Important to see that the US as a whole, it is slow, its slowest growth rate on record. For the United States, 17 states declined in population. So important to take that away. Think, okay, we are slowing down. No panic about accelerated growth. We're slowing. We're growing but slowing. If we look at that decade of 2010 to 2020, red, orange, yellow is positive growth. All of the shades of blue is decline. You can see that concentrated growth along the I-25 corridor. 95% of our growth occurred in the I-25 corridor compared to historical trends, which is closer to 78%. Concentrated. Those blue counties, 16 of them, aggregated 7,200 people decline. So it's not a gazillion people in terms of that decline. And this is on average. We saw about the same the previous decade. But take away concentrated growth in the I-25 corridor. What's causing growth? Now, media, pay attention. I can't tell you how many times I hear, oh, we increased by 744,000. All of those people moved to the state. And I'm like, no. Okay, there are three components: births, deaths, net migration. Births, I think we all get that, right? 600,000 births over the decade, a little bit more, 648,000. Then we've got deaths. We had about 362,000. Net migration, about 445,000. Okay, so more births than net migration. Don't panic about people moving here. If we look at this chart, it shows total population change since 1970. The blue component is natural increase, births minus deaths. The red piece is net migration, the ins minus the outs. What you'll hopefully see on that far right-hand side is everything's slowing down. We reached our peak growth this last decade in 2015, and consecutively every year after that, a slowdown. So when you hear media say accelerated growth, exponential growth, people flocking here, say, what? If you remember your math class, there is no exponential in that. Nothing. So remember those components. Piece I really want to talk about is this slowdown in births. So we see that slowdown in net migration or natural increase primarily because there's a slowdown in births. We hit our peak birth in 2007, us and the United States. Colorado is down 8,000 fewer births per year, though we have more women of childbearing age. The US is down 525,000 births. Over the decade, the United States declined 1 million in its under 18 population. All of the shades of blue are states that had an absolute decline in the under 18 population. Should higher ed be paying attention to this? Absolutely. Who is one of our largest donor states? California, into our higher ed system. We are getting the full court press from these states to also attract our kids out. They want butts in seats, and if you understand the correlation then with economic development, if you can get that kid into a college seat, you've got a really good chance of also including them into your economy. So we need to be concerned, and we know that there's going to be a much harder pressure, deeper pressure on our kids, and harder to attract and retain the best and the brightest. If we look at Colorado, our population under 18 only increased by 38,000. Of that, 744,000. Only 5% of our growth was in our under 18. All of the shades of blue are the counties that declined in the under 18 population. Red, orange, yellow was positive. 43 of the 64 counties declined. Okay, this is real. What does this mean? This means that our future labor force is going to get tighter and tighter. What does that mean? We need to do a better job of making sure that every single one of us is super good. Right? We need to be so good at what we do, whether it's in leisure and hospitality, banking, law, whatever it is, we need to be super good because we don't have excess capacity in the future. Why do people migrate here? So this is the third component. Why do people migrate? There's a huge correlation between job growth and net migration. Duh, right? When you grow stronger jobs, you need people to fill those positions. A lot of times we miss that because people say, Elizabeth, I am totally done with people. And I'm like, man, I'm the state demographer. That's not cool. And I'm like, but what do you think about jobs? And they're like, oh, I love jobs. Jobs are so awesome. I'm like, yeah, but a person fills that job. And the housing units where that job sleeps at night. How can we hate people but love jobs? And that's the job of all of you guys, to help message. The narrative that needs to be out there is that if you're going to be pro-job, you also need to be pro-people. Because we need people to fill these positions. We need housing to provide housing services for those people to sleep at night. One of the big takeaways from this is that you can see right at the 2025 mark is that we are expecting a bounce back in terms of jobs, gaining jobs. And then Henry mentioned about the stimulus dollars that are out there, so that's going to drive a lot. But after that, you see the slowdown in job growth and net migration. Why? Because of this slowdown in people. If you don't have the labor force, it doesn't count as a job, right? So important to take that away is that we're forecasting a slowdown because the U.S. is slowing down. So let's talk about that housing where that job sleeps at night. First, I want you to focus on the orange bars. The orange bars is annual housing unit growth. Big takeaway is that this last decade, we produced 278,000 housing units. The previous decade, we produced 405,000. That is a drop of 125,000, 126,000 housing units that came online between each decade. Yet our population actually increased by more over this last decade than the previous decade. The black line is household formation. So the thing that you should also take away from this is that we don't do a very good job of building housing at the same rate as household formation. Now, I get it with housing. It's tough, right? Construction, it takes time to get started, to get going. It takes a lot of effort to slow down. But we've got to try and improve this. It's horrible when it slows down and we lose workers. They don't come back. They maybe move to another state, like Texas. God forbid. I can say that. I'm native. But these are things that we can do better. How can we do better? And this is one of the pieces. We've got to do a better job of marrying housing and population. I was talking with somebody the other day, and they're like, God, can you just imagine this housing boom that's going on right now? I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, no, this boom. And I'm like, what are you looking at? If you only started this picture looking at 2010 forward, you would definitely think that we're at a boom. But if you go back to 1990, you'd say, oh, we're about average. And that's why I'm going to encourage all of you to also look at your narrative, think about what you're saying and what you're hearing in terms of time perspective, in terms of growth. I won't go into the housing supply and demand components. You can read those pieces up there. I just want to talk a little bit about the demand and the demand that's shifting. We really understand this relationship between job growth and population growth, so that's there. Second piece is aging. As we age, that household size diminishes. So that same housing resource provides less service. For example, my family of four, we were a family of four, now we're a family of two, the two have launched. That same house, I'm not going anywhere, only provides services to two people rather than four. That's happening across the spectrum. So keep that in mind in terms of use. Millennials. We've always been talking about the millennials. They have already launched. They're already way on their way. They're not only just first-time home buyers, they're second-time home buyers and second home owners. They're aging into second home ownership. So that has a big impact. The Zs are already in the housing market. So that's another component that's creating additional demand. Likewise, the additional dollars that are out there. People weren't able to travel. They didn't have big weddings. So they're saying, shoot, I've got some money. I'm going to go buy a house. And that's increasing demand in terms of housing. The other piece I just want to put in the back of your mind is these institutional investors buying up single-family homes, as well as the cannabis industry, with cash and holding them vacant. We're starting to do some research on our end, but there's thousands of housing units being held vacant. And that is just not right. Housing should be used for a housing service. Next thing I'm going to talk about is age. Age is probably the most important variable that you guys look at because it impacts everything from what you buy, where you buy it, how much money, if you're in the labor force. This is Colorado's age distribution broken down by single year of age. The black line is at 65. Purple are our baby boomers, then we've got our Gen X, our red millennials, then our blue Gen Z, and then our next generation. So on the far left-hand side, you can see that slowdown. It is real. That slowdown, there's fewer 0-year-olds than there are 60-year-olds. You can also see the great deal of people aging into that 65 plus. So thinking about the number of people aging out of the labor force, we're forecasting about 500,000 this decade aging out of the labor force. And that doesn't get to be counted as a new job. If I leave my job, age out, somebody comes in to fill my position, that doesn't count as a new job, it's an old job. And so that's going to create demand for workers, just all of us aging out. Not that everybody leaves at 65, some leave at 55, some leave at 75. But over this next decade, where are we forecasting the most growth? If we look by age group here, very little growth in the under 17. Pretty flat in the 18 to 24. Hopefully, if we can migrate people, growth in that 25 to 44, pretty flat on the 45 to 64. But if you look at the 65 plus, our fastest growth and our largest numbers. Of that 716,000, about 314,000 alone in the 65 plus. That's not going to be your labor force. But they are going to be living in housing units. And some of you may be asking yourself, gosh, where do all of these folks come from? Look in a mirror. It is us. We're not a big migrant of older adults. We're not like a Florida or an Arizona. It's just us aging in place. Last thing I'm going to mention is race and ethnicity. We are becoming more racially and ethnically diverse, and the business community needs to be able to leverage that. 2/3 of our growth over the last decade was in the BIPOC or people of color category. Important to realize that that is going to be, in the future, the largest share of our growth in our labor force, especially because it's our youngest adults that are more diverse than any other age group. If we look at our population under 24, much more diverse than those that are older, especially the 65 plus. So making sure that we're looking at strategies to attract and retain and market to a more diverse community is going to be really important for our future. So what are we forecasting? We are forecasting to get back a little bit of growth. Hopefully, we'll be able to attract and retain people to Colorado's economy, but then slowing down out into the future. A slowdown, continued slowdown in births, increase in deaths because we're just a little bit older. So never do we get back to levels of natural increase that we've seen historically, but then slowing down out into the future. But still growing. We're still forecasting to increase from that 5.7 million to 7.5 million by 2050. That's 1.8 million. And most of that growth along the I-25 corridor, along the Front Range. It's going to still be significant. I think in the Denver metro area, we're forecasting a little over 800,000 over this time frame. Thinking about transportation, thinking about water, thinking about housing, how do we accommodate additional people into the community? So, what are my takeaways for you guys? Labor force, this tightness, it's new. It's not going to stop. So what we need to be thinking about is how do we get more people into the labor force? And that's your job. How do we get more people into the labor force and stay in the labor force? The fact that we're also going to be more diverse, so looking at attracting and retaining a diverse labor force. Making sure that, right now it's going to move much more from a firm-centered to a person-centered. That employee is going to rock your world. And looking at benefits, looking at education, looking at training are going to be super important. Likewise, housing. So with that, be aware that there's still a lot of risks to this forecast. I think the number ones are still pandemic uncertainty and international migration. With water bringing in that top three, I would say they're all about the same level. So lots of things to keep our eyes open for, and I want to thank you guys so much for having me. And now we'll turn it back over to Dennis. Thank you.
Boy, if we're going to get you out of bed this early in the morning, it's good that we have dynamic speakers, right? That was awesome, Elizabeth. Thank you. No pressure, Tim. Just kidding. Our next panelist, number 3, is Tuhin Halder. He's the Vice President of Finance and Chief Financial Officer of the Mountain West region of Comcast. He leads a $4 billion plus business in 5 states with more than 2 million customers and 2,500 employees. He's responsible for delivering growth, profitability, and customer delight. I'm not that line. Tuhin's areas of responsibility include all aspects of finance, project management, business assurance, capital management, warehouse fleet, and facilities. Prior to Comcast, he spent 10 years at Grupo Bimbo in various roles: global CFO of $700 million business in 11 countries across North America, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Asia, divisional CFO of an $850 million business that included brands like Sara Lee, Thomas, Entman's, Orrery, Ballpark. Tuhin has over 23 years of diverse business experience, strategy and corporate development, strategic planning, business transformation, product management, and sales. He has bachelor's and master's degrees in mechanical engineering and an MBA with a distinction from Michigan Ross. He is an art enthusiast and painter, an avid do-it-yourselfer. He currently resides in the Denver area with his wife and daughter. Let's welcome Tuhin.
Thank you, Dennis. It's great to be here. Good morning, everyone. I'm not an economist, so I promise you I have only one chart. And as you mentioned, in the intro, I do have responsibility for warehouse and supply chain. So the topic of my discussion will be around supply chain and the disruptions that we are facing right now. So last week, I was at Starbucks and I got my coffee, and there was no sleeve. So I said, I need a sleeve. They said, no, sir, there's no sleeve. We have 2 cups for it. I said, okay. I went to the same Starbucks yesterday and did the same thing. 2 cups, no sleeve. So I asked, and they said, we do not have sleeves. Now, I spend quite a bit of time in retail. It's a penny business. I can guess probably a cup is probably 2 times the cost of a sleeve. Now imagine that, what's happening and what this supply chain and the disruption is doing to our businesses. Starbucks is actually spending double on every cup because there is no sleeve, and they're giving 2 cups because they don't want to burn our fingers. So that's what's going on, around us. This thing, I call this, the concoction of craziness. These small things just leading to these shortages. I was chatting with a friend of mine. He needed to replace his windshield last year. They said, sir, you have to wait for 2 months. So why? Because the glass manufacturers are making bottles for vaccine. So you can imagine, this virus thing has just disrupted the delicate balance of supply here in US, coming from outside, transportation bottlenecks, and so on and so forth. So I think Henry and Elizabeth, you talked a lot about economics and charge. So I'm going to just start with what we see happen in 2022. And again, unfortunately, the economics and what happens around us plays a big role. So the first thing is interest rate and the monetary tightening. Now, I'm not going to get into the charts, as I said earlier, but if Jamie Dimon is right and we get 7 hikes, that's going to change the market, or that's going to change the sentiment. Because just the talk of a hike, we saw what happened in the last week and a half in the marketplace. And the good news is that whenever Fed has talked about hikes, market overreacts, and then they never do so many hikes as they say they do. So hopefully it goes that way. But they're actually planning to do 3 things: hike, stop bond buying, and then actually shrink the balance sheet that they have. So we'll see where that goes. But the interplay of that is with inflation. So as you can see, obviously, what happened during COVID was people stayed home, and instead of, US is a consumer economy, 70% of the economy is consumer-based. People were not going to restaurants, to salons, and other places. They were buying stuff. It worked for a few months, but then people were buying so many things, and folks were not working, that it started creating bottlenecks. So the question for 2022 is, will the economy open, and will we go back to the services side of the business, or will we stay home and continue to buy goods, and then we don't know what that will do from a supply chain perspective? And then transportation bottlenecks. And again, folks not being in the workplace is causing bottlenecks at ports, at airports. I remember from a Comcast perspective, obviously we have equipment at your homes, and there's one particular equipment that we need for our Comcast business folks, for your businesses. And we had to airship it from China. And then we were very happy about that, but then it was stuck at Los Angeles airport for 15 days. So we spent all that money to get it to US, but then the customs won't clear. So we were not able to take care of customers the way we would like it to. So all that needs to be resolved, or we'll have to figure out what happens to that. And then obviously the regular feature like oil price. We talked about labor market and retirement and childcare, because again, virus is forcing a lot of folks to stay home and take care of whoever they're taking care of, because it's probably much cheaper to stay at home than to go back to work and pay for the childcare. So again, delicate balance there. We talked about Great Resignation. Stimulus savings, I think that's another key factor about whether people will return back to the workforce or not. Because at times when all the money was given, you talked about $19 trillion, the savings rate in US, I think in around first half of 2020 was 20%. Now it's around 14 or so percent. But people have a lot of money in their bank from all this stimulus money, which is actually disincentivizing them from joining. So we'll have to see where that goes. And the reason for all this is that all this plays into supply chain. If people come back, if more people start driving trucks, this supply chain problem will eventually go away. If we say status quo, maybe it won't. So I think the biggest elephant in the room is this guy, or the biggest tiny guy in the room is this guy. And everything will depend on where this guy will take us. So moving on to real supply chain and what we are seeing from my perspective, from our perspective in business, I'm going to show you three pictures. And then you can make some guess or see if you can correlate these three pictures. So picture number one, this is the Texas freeze from last year, February of 2021. We've seen this. This is the Long Beach port in California. All these big containers waiting. And then this is very close to my business, our business. These are the conduits, and the other ones on the left, that's a pedestal, we call it. So this is where, when we're in your neighborhood, providing connections to you, we use the conduit to get fiber to your place, and then these are the pedestals where we hold the electronics. So how are these three linked? These three are linked, in terms of supply chain challenge. So what happened last year? So along with COVID and all the different things we talked about, last year when Texas froze, obviously, we saw the pictures and what happened, but one of the things that Texas was not prepared for was all the gas lines. And they were not winterized, and 50% of the gas supply was just taken off because there were cracks and the gas couldn't go. And as you know, gas is a major feeder into chemicals industry. And 80% of the olefins that feed into these injection molders that they make chemicals and the feds and the conduits for our fiber, they couldn't make anything. But these things have happened before. But what we would do is the supply chain was there. We will get stuff in ships, and we will send it to the injection molders, and we'll get these the plastic parts that we would need. But guess what? Last year, even now, the ports have backlog. So that's how it was linked. So along with the regular challenges faced from COVID, little disruption in the supply chain created so much issue that right now, even we are still facing big issues with plastics and how all this links together in terms of taking care of our customers. So as I mentioned, I'm going to have only one chart. And this is an interesting chart that I thought I have to show in terms of at least showing what's happening in the supply chain world. And this is, we have a lot of entrepreneurs here. If you can, start a business of transport. Because this is a chart that shows the difference of people who were in the transportation sector pre-COVID. So December of 2019 versus November of 2021. If you can see the traditional transportation sector, air, rail, water, truck, all of them, there are a lot less people in the sector. Where did they go? They're all working for Amazon. Yeah, because we deal with people. The transportation sector, as you know, it was a mom and pop. This is a really small business. Most of them are 4, 5 people, 10 people businesses. And with Amazon providing $15 to $20 an hour, college benefits, other benefits, a lot of people moved. So along with people staying home, great resignation, folks thinking, hey, stock market is good, my housing prices are good, I'm not going to get back to work, COVID is dangerous. People are working for Amazon. So this is all just again the concoction of craziness that has led us to where we are, and we are all paying for it. So then what are we doing, right? And I can only talk about from a large business perspective, what are we doing? But some of them are also from a small business perspective, because we are regional business, we cater to you, and we think like small business because, again, our relationship with you is one-to-one. So from a Comcast perspective, what are we doing at a very high level? And that takes time, right? It's a long-term trend, is establishing more diverse supplier base, bringing supplier onshore if possible. Now, it's not easy. U.S. is we talked about chemicals and plastics. U.S. is the second largest chemical producer in the world after China. It's not easy to make more chemicals overnight, but we are working with different suppliers to see what we can do to have less dependencies on air freight and on water freight. And then simplify. Winston Churchill said that do not let a good crisis go to waste. And we are doing that. I'm hoping that all of you are doing that. For example, we had 10 different kinds of hammer drills, 10 different kinds for our techs. Do we really need 10 different kinds of hammer drills? I don't think so. And those are some of the things that we are looking at. We are using this opportunity to really, really simplify our business. And I'm hoping that you're doing the same for yours in terms of evaluating your business plan, reimagining, because this will be my third big, let's say, recession or crisis in the United States. I grew up in India, so the dot-com and then the Great Recession and the housing. And every time, as a country, we come out of recession, some business model changes that just takes all of us by surprise. So if we are like self-disrupting and working on it ourselves, then hopefully we will not be disrupted. For example, yes, Steve Jobs launched iPhone in 2007, but think about it. Without iPhone, there would not have been any Uber. There would not have been any Airbnb or digitally ordering phone from Starbucks. That all happened, though, after, right? After the crisis. And then suddenly, the whole world is different. So right now, as we are thinking about what do we do today, I have this feeling that somebody in Silicon Valley or India or China or even in downtown Denver or Boulder, they're trying to disrupt our businesses. And we need to simplify and be proactive about that. And from a local basis, Comcast is a $120 billion company, global. But locally, these are some of the things we are doing. We are proactively outreaching to all the vendors almost daily, trying to understand the supply demand and then prioritizing how we take care of the customer. A lot of collaboration and communication. I haven't been on so many calls, Zoom calls, one after another, no break in between, because we just have to collaborate more. There's no more, what we call the interruption or discussion as you walk around on the hallway. Now you have to be deliberate about it, but you have to take care of a customer and you have to do it. And then, there are certain things that as a finance person I don't like. For lack of a better word, we are stocking up. That adds to inflation. We are willing to pay more. That is adding up to inflation. We are, shipping from air shipping from China. That's adding up to inflation. But then this is what we have to do. So that's from a supply chain challenge. I hope I got a little flavor of what we see from a business perspective and what we are doing. And as a Comcast, obviously, thanks for having us here. The biggest thing I think businesses need to do is to be with the community, engage with the community. Like August meeting like this, we work with many different communities. Our COVID response. One of the things that I'm hoping that you've heard about us doing is the lift zones. We now have 1,000 lift zones where folks can come in. These are public libraries or community centers where people can come in and there's free internet and people can do a job interview there, talk to their loved ones, or even do homework. And then this is one thing that we are very proud of, which is Comcast Rise. And this is a program, when we started, we were supporting businesses owned by people of color, and we would provide them marketing, media, and technology support. And recently we opened it up for all businesses, all women-owned businesses. So next time you go into a business that's people of color owned or women owned, just tell them to go to ComcastRise.com, and we will be able to support these businesses and accelerate them. And finally, when COVID happened, one of my colleagues say COVID was the biggest stress test on the history of internet, because overnight, the need went up 33%, and we tried our best to allow the folks to work from home, do schooling from home, and then obviously we also signed up with Trump administration and signed up with Keep America Connected. So that way, because of COVID and the higher unemployment rate that happened at that time, if somebody is facing some financial constraint, we will not disconnect. And now we are participating in the Affordable Connectivity Program, again, for folks who need help through this program. We will be able to help and provide internet to our constituents. So with that, thank you for your time, and I'm going to pass it on to you then.
That was great, Tuhin. Thank you so much. All of our speakers were really good. We've got a couple more minutes, and I'm going to toss a couple questions out to our panelists. I've got one for each of you, and then one general one. If we could try to keep it to a minute, because we're running out of time. No problem. So the big topic that I wanted to ask all of you is, we just witnessed a winter wildfire that claimed lives in more than 1,100 homes and businesses in Boulder County. What will be the impact of continuing climate change have on Colorado businesses? I'm going to just hopefully pull this thing off and hand it over. We'll start with you, Tuhin.
Thank you. For our business, because our business is, we have one-to-one connection with our customers. For us, the climate change and the impact of it is paramount. And what we have done, and obviously we saw what happened in Marshall Fire, but we have businesses in California and other parts of the country. And each time, a fire happens or a hurricane happens, we learn from it. And as a company, what we are doing is we are just ready. We are prepared to impact and help the community right away. So for example, if there's a reason for which internet is down, we have mobile hotspots so that folks can connect and do their work. We obviously, through forums like this, support the community in cash and in kind to basically help folks get through calamities like that.
Yeah, no, I think climate change is huge and will be impacting population growth and how we grow and where we grow. Certainly water is a huge factor that a lot of people are looking for and making sure that they can provide and have enough water for that future development and using it more wisely and more strategically. And likewise looking at development plans, and there's projects, at the local level, at the state level, for when communities are looking at putting together a planning process where they can get more technical support and how to do that in more of an environmentally friendly way, using less resources and thinking strategically of where those developments occur. But it's going to be a big one, and certainly a potential big constraint for the growth of the state as a whole.
Thank you. Great question. I think I would double down on the water concept, but I think one thing to keep in mind as you're looking as business planners, the state has a renewable percentage goal that it's trying to achieve, a very high standard of renewables being used. And you're starting to see utility policy migrate towards their fee policy. You're seeing local district initiatives. City of Denver, there was a citizens initiative about green roofs. As adopted by the voters, it was relatively unworkable, but the parties got to the table and they negotiated basically a rewrite of it. You're starting to see fee structures to accommodate different contributions to greenhouse gases. And then I also think as businesses, that your customers are expecting to be able to participate with a company that shares the values around climate change. It's not a unanimously agreed issue, but that the climate is changing seems to have some agreement. So whether you call it carbon footprint or adaptation, I think this is just part of normal business operations. So things like, we'll see this in Colorado with what happened in Boulder. When there's too much dry fuel, is there enough public resource to do clearing? When people talk about forest health, it is easy to talk about forest health in a conference room with your cookie and cup of coffee. Forest health on the ground with workforce, roads, chainsaws, much different conversation. And so I think you'll just start to see government at all levels start adapting to this, but the rules for business are going to be marrying up with that.
All right. We'll just keep starting on this side, Tuhin. I was going to ask you about the dispute between Comcast and Altitude so we can see our playoffs, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to do that. I told him I was going to let him off the hook. So the importance of broadband technology is undeniable for our economy here in Colorado. I was wondering if I could ask you a little bit about efforts Comcast has to widen the reach, especially to rural areas, to help with healthcare, education, and job development. You can't even apply for a job unless you have online access.
That's a great question. From a Comcast perspective, we are working with all local and governmental agencies to expand our reach into the rural areas. So I have two great news to share. End of 2020, we actually fired up Kremlin, Colorado. And now at Kremlin, Colorado, they have broadband and the internet that we experience here. We are right now working and connecting people in Eagle and Gypsum. And then with the rural broadband effort that the government is spending or giving grants, we are working with federal and the local government agencies, and we are working to expand in other rural areas within Colorado.
Okay, cool. We'll just keep coming down. My next question is for Elizabeth. This has to do with the infrastructure, and we're talking about federal funding is coming down. We've got state funding on infrastructure. I'm going to ask you if you could pull out your crystal ball and what kind of infrastructure is needed for Colorado's population and certain demographic growth. You mentioned the aging population. So I was wondering if you can maybe talk about that a little bit.
So, obviously infrastructure is really important to support population growth, but it's really hard to sometimes get it done, whether it's roads, bridges, water systems. It typically takes public funding, and that's maybe not where we necessarily put all of our focus. And so some of the constraints that we're feeling, the tightness and uncomfortableness that we're feeling a lot of times is just because infrastructure hasn't necessarily kept up with the population growth. So it's going to be vital. I think it's going to be critical. Water, again, I think is going to be one of the number one factors that we look at. But also taking into account that it's not just our population that creates tightness on our infrastructure, it's also the millions of visitors that we get annually. And so making sure that we're also taking into account everybody else that visits the states and turns our economy into those infrastructure plans as well, I think is going to be important as well.
All right, Henry, you're up. So, speaking of infrastructure, the scarcity of skilled labor in the construction industry has been an issue for many years, but it's gotten markedly worse over the pandemic. Do you see that as any kind of a speed bump in meeting these infrastructure demands?
Yes. Sure. Politico had a story where the headline pullout quote was, "The bridges aren't going to build themselves." And so state of Colorado, since a year ago, passed a major transportation bill, Senate Bill 260 last year. We'll stop the bleeding a little bit in our highway and road system. And there is meaningful one-time dollars that will be available for broadband or water projects and other things in the federal stimulus. But this question is absolutely part of the equation. And the good news is there's a timeline on the federal money of 2 or 3 or 4 years before all the money has to be spent. Here in Colorado, the construction industry has actually created its own academy to try to increase supply of workers. But there was a bullet in one of Elizabeth's slides around international immigration. And as a strategic labor resource, that issue, America needs to kind of lean in and have a strategic, rational conversation, work backwards from where we want to be on that subject. Just like the bridges won't build themselves, the workers won't be trained in time. So the sooner we start, the sooner that workforce is ready to go. I'll give you an example, just even the lead time when you have the workforce. If anyone remembers T-Rex from way back when, the bonds to do that were passed in 1999. All the banquets celebrating the completion of the project early were 2005 and 2006. So when you think about where are we with infrastructure, the sooner you start, the sooner you'll finish, and it takes 4 or 5 years to get from A to B.
Okay, we've got about 5 more minutes, so we've got time for this question. I think will be of good use for all of you. This question was sent in by Kevin. He's always got good questions. What is the difference in your outlook and your planning for 2022 as compared to this time in 2021? We'll start with you, Henry.
Thank you. You can't probably capture it in one answer. You know, for our business, we went online in the space of about 2 weeks, 30,000 plus students just at Fort Collins. And so the availability of the broadband, the facility with the software, and also our customers and their resilience and their adaptability. So from a year ago to now, this will be the subject of books, stories. Eventually, once people are ready, maybe some funny movies about the switch, but it's not funny right now. So as we look ahead, we're trying to manage the sentiment and the frustration of wanting to be together, the impact of collaboration, the impact of learning better while we're in the same rooms, structures like this where you have dialogue. So I think now it's how do you keep more of this, the best parts of aspects like this and the best parts of the online. That seems to be the success path in our space that we're working the most on.
So our business is trying to forecast population change and economic growth. And I think if we look at 2021, we definitely knew that there was going to be a forward impact on labor force. We've been forecasting it for several years, knowing just our age dynamic. I think the big surprise was actually probably the accelerated retirements and the impact that that's having on the labor force. I also, I think that we still have a little bit of this housing conundrum in terms of we are increasing housing units. Our population growth is slowing down, yet we're still feeling this acceleration in home prices. So more research and more work, I think, needs to be done in that area to understand the impacts, because there's a lot of public dollars out there that could be going into housing, and we want to make sure that that's used efficiently. And I think the third thing is really also this big slowdown in births is much bigger and longer than we had really, I think, forecast. And for then businesses to be thinking about long run, what this is going to mean in terms of impact to the labor force, but also thinking about it from the other side is how can we maybe create some more family-friendly strategies to make it actually easier to have kids, will be a long run important thing for us to be looking at.
Thank you, Mary. So for us, the word is flexibility. So 2020 was a shock, right? So that needed us to adapt and adapt fast. 2021 was, living in COVID steady state, because we knew vaccines were coming, but there was also, we knew that we'll be working from home. My daughter did online. So there was some level of, we knew what will happen. 2022 is flexibility, because right now we don't know. And flexibility from taking care of our customers. So for example, let's say tomorrow, all of you say, hey, we want to connect with Comcast, or we want, and we might not have one equipment, and we talked about supply chain. We'll have to be flexible to find out where can we find that particular equipment, get it airshipped, and connect with you. And then same thing with flexibility with our teammates, because a portion of them don't want to come back to office at all. A portion of them can't wait to come back and hug each other. And then how do you balance that is what 2022 is going to be. So it will be flexibility across the board.
Great. Well, I think that just about does it. We're on time and under budget, which is how economists like to be, right? So can we get a big round of applause? I thought all of our speakers were fantastic. Thank you. Appreciate it. And if you guys have any story ideas from your businesses that Denver Gazette readers want, send them my way. Yep.
I want to thank our panelists for a fantastic program this morning. Henry Sobanet, thank you. Elizabeth Garner, thank you very much. Tuhin Halder, thank you very much for being here. And Dennis, your spur of the moment acceptance of doing this has been fantastic, and I thank you as well. I'd like to also thank our chamber team for their work today. Lori Gerlitz, Allison Crowder, and Nick Eden. Thank you very much. All of you have done a fantastic job, and it's very much appreciated. Our chamber ambassadors. They're important, and they did a tremendous job this morning with the registration and engaging all of you, our guests. Thank you to the ambassadors very much. I want to thank the hotel staff. You've been fabulous to work with. And the breakfast was fantastic, so thank you very much. Tom Barr, Light Sail Video. Tom has videoed for us today the presentations, and those will be posted, so please watch for those if you like to either share with other folks that weren't able to be here, or if you just want to re-look at everything and gather a little more information. I do want to thank Michael Penny. Michael Penny is our VP of Economic Development for the South Metro Denver Chamber. Michael, would you stand up and just, he had to leave. Will you please tell him that we said thank you? As you depart today, you'll see there's some posters out in the hallway. One is on our February 10th Economic Development meeting. It's going to be a fantastic program. We have some fantastic speakers. Tim, you're one of the speakers. We'll see you again in February. It will be very, very informative. And I think from a business standpoint, when we get to tourism, recreation, and hospitality, I think it affects all of us in our daily life, whether it's for our own recreation or for our business. So please look at that as you go out. And then there's also the information on the March 31st South Metro Denver Chamber Business Awards. And we would like for all of you to nominate those folks that are deserving of these awards. So please look at those as you leave this morning. If you're not a chamber member, and I know we have some folks here that aren't, we would love for you to join the chamber. I think you can see the importance of community and events of this type. So again, if you're not a member, we certainly want to welcome you with open arms and ask you to give us a call. We'd love to have you join the chamber. If you are a chamber member, please know you make this community a better place to do business and a better place to live. And I think you should all be proud of that. And we thank you for being a chamber member and being here today. So I want to thank you. Safe travels. Have a fantastic day and a wonderful weekend.